My name is Athena. I am a teacher. I am a model. I own my own beauty business. I started it about a year ago, and I started modeling when I was 16. I stopped for school. My mom wanted me to finish high school and go through college, so I did all those things that I was supposed to do. And then as soon as I moved out of my parents' house, I waited a year, and then I was pushed, and I had to motivate myself and really get back in that industry, and I have, and I love it. And a teacher, I've always been a person who was around children, even as a child. My mom had kids when I was 13, so 13 years apart, so I always had a hand in raising my 3 younger siblings. And I've always had a nurturing personality, so when I graduated college, even before that, I was working with youth. That's usually what my background is. And then just recently, I moved from youth into young children. And now I teach preschool, and I love that too. So I started working with youth when I was about 14, I believe. I think it was 14 or 15, at a camp called Marygrove. I was a camper there for 5 years, and then I took a year off, and I went back as a CIT. And then I worked for that organization for 5 years as well. So 5 years as a camper, 5 years as a counselor. That was my first ever interaction, or my first ever job working with young people. And I absolutely loved it. It was shaped, it's usually the basis when I go for interviews now, it's a base of who I am, and really built me up to the person I am today. And even to have patience and being able to work with different personality types, and everyday work, when you have a job and you have an issue, you're okay, it's fine, I don't like this person at work, I get to go home and decompress and then go back in the morning. Whereas for camp, it's sleepover camp, you're there, you wake up, they're there, and you go to sleep, they're there. So it teaches you patience, it teaches you priorities. You're not there for yourself, your own selfish needs, you're there to give back, you're there to love the youth and give them something that they're missing in their life, and give them their vacation. And I loved being in a space where it pushed me to continuously think about others. I've always been a giver. I've always wanted to I always want to make sure the other person is feeling good and they're in a good space and they're happy, and that is what feeds me, is what makes me happy. So that was my first ever interaction with youth, and then I carried that off. I've worked with the Boys and Girls Club, Kiwanis Boys and Girls Club. I was a program coordinator there. I had my own youth. I worked for that part-time, and then they had a camp, and so then they hired me full-time for that summer, and I was the head of the youth department, and I loved it. It was so amazing, and it was such a great experience, and it was a different age group. At camp, it was 11 to 12, and then the kids I had at the Boys and Girls Club were 13 to 14, so just a little bit older. It was a challenge. That age group, I know it just only seems like such a short amount of time, but a lot of changes happen within a year, especially in that age group. So it was a different challenge, and also that camp was all girls, and I had male youth in that as well, and they're from different priority neighborhoods, and it was amazing. And it was, again, that sense of giving back and understanding where I was, and I was in a place where I was a camper, and I expected a certain stature of my counselor, and I knew what those expectations were, and I'm still young, so I was not too old not to forget who I was when I was their age, but also old enough to be respected. So that's the perfect age, I feel, for people who want to work with youth. It's very hard to work with young people and try to feel like you're this person who could help them, but they know that you either haven't been in the situation that they've been in, or you're just there to get paid, right? So you need to have that balance of having a background, receiving those services in order to understand what it is to give them.